The letter arrived on a Tuesday, tucked inside an envelope the color of old bone. I recognized the stationery before I recognized the handwriting. Pemberton Holdings, embossed in gold so faint it seemed ashamed of itself. After 5 years of silence, after everything I had given and everything I had swallowed, Nolan Pemberton had finally written to me. Not to apologize, not to explain, to inform me that my services were no longer required at the charitable foundation I had built with my own hands, my own sleepless nights, my own belief that quiet devotion would eventually speak for itself. The board has decided to move in a new direction. 7 words. That's all it took to erase 5 years of my life. I set the letter down on my kitchen table, the same table where I'd once spread blueprints for the children's wing of Harrogate General, the same table where I'd eaten countless dinners alone while waiting for a phone call that never came. And I did not cry. I had stopped crying over Nolan Pemberton 3 years ago, on the night I finally understood that loving someone in silence doesn't make you noble. It makes you invisible. The morning light fell through my window in pale sheets, illuminating dust motes that drifted like the years I had wasted. Outside, the coastal fog was lifting from Avalon Cove, revealing the jagged cliffs that had become my refuge after I left the city. Left the life I had constructed around a man who saw me only when it was convenient. I was 53 years old. I had survived a marriage that ended in quiet devastation, raised a daughter who now lived across an ocean, rebuilt myself from the wreckage of choices I had made when I was too young to understand their weight. And here I was, again, being erased by a man who had promised me that my place was permanent. Vivian, he had said, 5 years ago, standing in the half-finished lobby of what would become the Pemberton Foundation for Children's Health. I need someone I can trust, someone who understands what this means to me. Will you stay? I had stayed. That was my first mistake. My name is Vivian Thorne, and before I became the woman who built on Nolan Pemberton's legacy while he built his empire, I was simply a woman trying to survive. I met my first husband, George, when I was 24, young enough to believe that love was a destination rather than a daily choice. He was a financial consultant with kind eyes and a talent for making promises he couldn't keep. We married in a small ceremony in my parents' backyard in Meridian Falls, the kind of town where everyone knew your business and pretended not to. Our daughter, Claire, was born 2 years later, a red-faced miracle who changed everything and nothing at the same time. The marriage lasted 12 years, not because it was good, it wasn't, but because I had been raised to believe that endurance was the same as strength, that staying was the same as loving, that a woman's value was measured by her ability to keep a family intact, regardless of what it cost her. When George left for a colleague 15 years younger, as if the cliché were a requirement, I was 38 years old with a half-finished degree in non-profit management, a daughter about to start high school, and a savings account that could generously be described as modest. What I did have was a talent for organization, an instinct for what people needed before they knew they needed it, and a stubborn refusal to let my circumstances define my future. I finished my degree at night while working as an administrative assistant at a healthcare consulting firm during the day. Claire and I ate a lot of pasta those years, learned to find joy in small things. Library books and beach walks, and the particular comfort of problems that could actually be solved. By the time she graduated high school, I had worked my way up to program coordinator. By the time she finished college, I was directing a regional initiative that provided healthcare access to underserved communities. I was good at what I did. Not flashy good, not the kind of good that gets written about in industry magazines or invited to speak at conferences. I was the kind of good that makes sure the lights stay on, the grants get filed on time, the volunteers feel appreciated, the children who come through the program doors feel seen. The kind of good that's easy to overlook until it's gone. I was 48 when I met Nolan Pemberton, and by then I had stopped believing in fairy tales. I had built a life I was proud of. Small, yes, but mine. I had a one-bedroom apartment with a window that overlooked a community garden. I had friends who showed up when they said they would. I had a daughter who called me every Sunday, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. I was not looking for a man to save me. But Nolan wasn't looking to save anyone either. At least, not then. He was looking to build something that mattered, a foundation dedicated to children's health. Funded by the pharmaceutical fortune his family had spent 3 generations accumulating. He had heard about my work from a mutual colleague, and he wanted to meet. The first time I saw him, he was standing in the lobby of my office building, wearing a suit that cost more than my car, and looking entirely out of place among the second-hand furniture and flickering fluorescent lights. He was tall, over 6 feet, with silver threading through dark hair and eyes the color of storm clouds gathering over water. There was something about him that commanded attention without demanding it, a quality I would later learn to recognize as the particular confidence of men who have never been told no. "Miss Thorne?" He extended his hand. "I'm Nolan Pemberton. I hope I'm not interrupting." He was interrupting. I had a budget meeting in 40 minutes and a grant proposal due by end of day. But there was something in his voice, not arrogance exactly, but an intensity that suggested whatever he wanted to discuss was genuinely important to him. "Mr. Pemberton." I shook his hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive, and he held the handshake exactly 2 seconds longer than necessary, long enough to communicate that he was paying attention, not long enough to be inappropriate. "You're not interrupting, but I don't have much time. Perhaps we could schedule 5 minutes," he said. "That's all I'm asking. 5 minutes to explain why I tracked down one of the most undervalued program directors in the region and showed up unannounced at her office." I raised an eyebrow. "You did your research?" "I always do my research." He smiled then, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not attraction, not yet, but recognition. This was a man who saw details, who noticed what others missed. At the time, I thought that was a good thing. 5 minutes, I agreed. Those 5 minutes became 10, then 20. He told me about his youngest sister, who had died of a rare genetic condition when she was 7 years old. About the year he had spent watching his parents pour their grief into fundraising galas and donor dinners that raised millions but changed nothing. About his determination to build something different, a foundation that would fund actual research, provide actual care, make actual change in the lives of children who were too often invisible to the systems designed to help them. "I don't need someone who can organize galas," he said. "I need someone who understands what it means to build something from nothing. Someone who knows how to turn limited resources into lasting impact. Someone who—" He paused, studying my face with an intensity that made me want to look away. someone who won't quit when it gets hard. Mr. Pemberton, Nolan. Mr. Pemberton, I repeated, because I had learned long ago that first names create intimacy, and intimacy creates obligation. What you're describing would require years of work, not months, years. And healthcare non-profit is not my background. I work in community development, which is exactly why I want you. He leaned forward, and I caught a hint of his cologne, something subtle and expensive, like sandalwood and old money. The healthcare expertise I can hire, vision I can articulate. What I can't manufacture is institutional knowledge, grassroots experience, and the kind of credibility that comes from decades of actually doing the work instead of just funding it. He was offering me the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to build something meaningful with resources I had never dreamed of having access to, a chance to scale the kind of impact I had spent my career fighting for. And beneath all of that, something else, something I tried very hard not to acknowledge. He was looking at me the way no one had looked at me in years, not with pity, like the colleagues who whispered about my divorce, not with dismissiveness, like the donors who wrote checks but never learned my name. He was looking at me like I mattered, like what I thought and what I wanted and what I could build was worthy of his full attention. I should have said no. I should have recognized that the attention of powerful men comes with a price, that nothing in this world is ever truly given. It is only traded, often for more than you intended to pay. But I was 48 years old and tired of being invisible. I was good at what I did and exhausted by never being recognized for it. I was lonely in ways I didn't admit even to myself, and this man, this handsome, intelligent, grieving man, was offering me purpose and possibility and the dangerous illusion of being seen. I need time to think about it, I said. Take all the time you need. He stood, buttoning his jacket with the unconscious precision of someone who had been wearing expensive suits his entire life. But, Vivian, may I call you Vivian? I want you to know something. I don't make offers like this often, and I don't change my mind once I've made them. He left his card on my desk. I watched him walk out of my building and into a black car that'd been waiting at the curb, and I told myself that the flutter in my chest was excitement about the work, nothing more. 3 weeks later, I accepted his offer. That was 5 years ago. The foundation grew. Under my direction, and yes, it was my direction, even if Nolan's name was on the door. The Pemberton Foundation for Children's Health became one of the most effective healthcare non-profits in the region. We funded research that actually reached patients. We built programs that actually served communities. We created a model that other organizations began to replicate. I worked 70-hour weeks. I gave up weekends, vacations, the small pleasures that make a life feel like a life. I told myself it was for the children we were helping, for the legacy we were building, for the difference we were making. But if I'm honest, and I've learned that honesty with myself is the only currency that doesn't devalue, I also did it for him. Because somewhere along the way, in the late nights spent reviewing grant proposals in his office, in the shared meals eaten standing up between meetings, in the small moments when his hand would brush mine or his eyes would hold mine, a beat too long, I had fallen in love with Nolan Pemberton. I never told him. I was 50 years old, sensible, experienced enough to know that loving your employer, especially one as wealthy and prominent as Nolan, was a recipe for heartbreak. He was 10 years older than me, with a complicated history that included a long-ago divorce and a string of relationships with women who were younger, more glamorous, more suited to the world he inhabited. But he made me feel chosen. "I don't know what I would do without you," he said once, late one evening, when we had just secured funding for a pediatric cancer wing that would bear his sister's name. His voice was rough, with exhaustion and something else, something that sounded almost like gratitude. "Vivian, I need you to know, you're not just an employee to me. You're—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "I'm saying this badly." "You're tired," I said, because I was trying to give him an exit, a way to take back whatever he had been about to say. "I'm tired," he agreed, "but that's not why I'm saying it." He reached out then, and his fingers brushed my cheek, a touch so light I might have imagined it. "You see me, don't you? The real me, not the name or the money or the expectations." "I see you," I said. It was the truth. And the truth, I would learn, can be the most dangerous thing you ever offer someone. That night, standing in his office with the city lights glittering through floor-to-ceiling windows, he made me a promise. "I need more time," he said. "There are things in my life, complications, that I have to resolve before I can offer you what you deserve. But I want you to know that this—" He gestured between us. "This matters to me. You matter to me. And when the time is right, I will show you exactly how much." "Nolan, just wait for me," he said. "Can you do that? Can you trust me enough to wait?" I should have asked what I was waiting for. I should have demanded specifics, timelines, concrete answers instead of beautiful ambiguity. I should have recognized that wait for me is not a promise. It's a postponement, and postponements favor the person doing the asking. But I was 50 years old and in love for the first time since my marriage fell apart. And the man standing in front of me was looking at me like I was precious, like I was necessary, like I was the answer to a question he had been asking his whole life. "I'll wait," I said. Those two words cost me 5 years. The waiting, at first, didn't feel like waiting. It felt like building the foundation, building our partnership, building a future that I convinced myself was taking shape, even as it remained perpetually out of reach. Nolan was attentive without being available. He would call me late at night to discuss work, and the conversations would drift into something more personal. His memories of his sister, his complicated relationship with his father, his fears about legacy and meaning and what he would leave behind. He would send me flowers on my birthday, remember the anniversary of my mother's death, ask after Claire with genuine interest. But he never took me to dinner where anyone might see us. He never introduced me to his family as anything other than the director of the foundation. He never, in 5 years, made a single move toward turning his beautiful promises into concrete reality. I told myself it was because of his mother. Rosemary Pemberton was 83 years old, the widow of a pharmaceutical magnate and the undisputed queen of Lyndhurst society. She had opinions about everything. The appropriate amount to tip waitstaff, 15%, never more. The correct way to address household help, by surname only, and the kind of women who were suitable for her only surviving son, young, wealthy, preferably descended from old money. I was none of those things. "Mother is traditional," Nolan told me once when I asked, as neutrally as I could manage, whether I would ever be invited to the family's annual charity gala. "She has certain expectations. It's easier for now to keep things separate. Separate. There's a word that cuts. But I swallowed it, the way I had learned to swallow so many things over my years of being the understanding one, the patient one, the woman who made accommodations because someone had to, and it might as well be me. Besides, I told myself, I had the work, I had the mission, I had a purpose that transcended any romantic disappointment. And then, 3 years into my tenure at the foundation, everything changed. Nolan hired Marguerite Vance. She was 29 years old, with the kind of beauty that seems specifically engineered for photographs, all sharp cheekbones and glossy hair, and a smile that suggested she knew secrets you would never be clever enough to guess. Her father was a senator, her mother came from a banking family. Her credentials included degrees from institutions I couldn't have afforded, even with scholarships. She's going to handle donor relations, Nolan told me, as if hiring a socialite heiress to do a job I had been doing perfectly well was the most natural thing in the world. Free up some of your time for the program side. The program side, I repeated. Vivian. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. This isn't a demotion, it's a reassignment, a restructuring. The board has been pushing for more visibility, more high-profile engagement. Marguerite has connections that could open doors we haven't been able to open. Doors. He was talking about doors, as if the years I had spent building relationships with healthcare providers and community organizations and the actual human beings we were trying to help were somehow less valuable than access to the right parties. I understand, I said, and I did. I understood perfectly. Marguerite Vance was everything Rosemary Pemberton wanted for her son. Young, well-connected, the kind of woman who could be displayed at charity galas without raising eyebrows or inviting questions. I also understood that asking Nolan to choose between his mother's approval and me was a battle I would lose. So I did what I had always done. I accommodated. I adjusted. I made room for Marguerite in the organization I had built, trained her on processes I had developed, smiled through staff meetings where she took credit for ideas I had originated. And I waited, because Nolan had promised, because he still called me late at night, still looked at me like I was the only person in the room who truly understood him, still said things like, when the time is right and you matter to me, and I just need a little more patience. I was 52, then 53. My daughter got married in a ceremony I attended alone, explaining Nolan's absence with a vague reference to work commitments. My mother's house in Meridian Falls was sold, the proceeds split between siblings who had long since scattered to other lives. The years passed like water through cupped hands, too quickly to hold, impossible to recover. And then, on a Tuesday morning in October, the letter arrived. The board has decided to move in a new direction. After 5 years of building, 5 years of believing, 5 years of silence that I had mistaken for promise. Nolan Pemberton was finally done waiting. I did not call him. That was the first decision I made, sitting at my kitchen table with his letter in my hands and the fog lifting off Avalon Cove outside my window. I would not call, I would not email, I would not give him the satisfaction of my devastation or the convenience of my compliance. If Nolan Pemberton wanted to end 5 years of partnership, 5 years of unspoken promises and careful waiting, he could do it to my face. The second decision came 3 hours later, when my phone rang and his name appeared on the screen. I answered on the fourth ring. Not because I was trying to seem unbothered, I was past the point of games, but because I needed those 4 rings to gather myself, to smooth my voice into something that wouldn't betray the earthquake happening beneath my surface. Vivian? His voice was the same as always, deep, measured, with that particular quality that made you feel like whatever he was saying was meant specifically and only for you. I assume you received the letter. I did. A pause. I could picture him in his office at Pemberton Holdings, surrounded by dark wood and antique books and all the trappings of inherited wealth. I wanted to explain in person. Isn't what he stopped. Started again. Can you come to the city? Tomorrow? The city? As if Lyndhurst were a neutral location, as if asking me to travel 3 hours to receive an explanation for my dismissal were a reasonable request. The board meeting is Friday, I said instead. I'm still technically the director until the end of the month. I'll be there for transition discussions. Vivian, I'll see you Friday, Nolan. I ended the call before he could respond. Then I sat very still for a long time, watching the light change over the cove, feeling the shape of what came next beginning to form in the space between my ribs. The Pemberton Foundation was headquartered in a converted mansion on the outskirts of Lyndhurst. 12 bedrooms, a ballroom that had been turned into a conference space, gardens that required a full-time staff of 3. I had spent countless hours in that building, had learned to navigate its maze of hallways and hidden staircases, had come to think of it as a kind of second home. Walking through its front doors, that Friday felt like entering a house that had been sold to strangers. Everything was the same. The marble foyer, the sweeping staircase, the oil paintings of Pemberton ancestors, looking down from gilt frames with expressions of permanent disapproval. But I was different now. I was seeing it with the eyes of someone who had finally stopped belonging, and the perspective changed everything. Miss Thorne, the assistant at the front desk, a young woman I had hired 2 years ago, looked up with an expression that was equal parts sympathy and discomfort. They're already in the boardroom. Should I announce you, or? I know the way. The boardroom was on the second floor, through a set of carved mahogany doors that cost more than my annual salary had been in my previous life. I paused outside, gathering myself, reminding myself that I had walked into difficult rooms before and survived. Then I pushed open the doors. The table was long and polished to a mirror shine. 6 board members sat around it. All men, all in suits that cost more than some families earned in a month. At the head of the table was Nolan, looking as distinguished and controlled as ever in charcoal grey. And beside him, in a chair that should not have been there, because it had always been mine, sat Marguerite Vance. She was wearing cream silk. Her hair was swept back in a style that looked effortless and probably cost several $100s to achieve. When she saw me, her smile was perfect. Warm, professional, utterly empty. Vivian. Nolan stood, and for a moment something flickered across his face. Guilt, perhaps, or something that wanted to look like guilt. Thank you for coming. Of course. I walked to the seat that remained at the far end of the table, as far from him as possible. I believe we have transition matters to discuss. The meeting was efficient and terrible in equal measure. The board had prepared talking points, organizational evolution, strategic realignment, new directions for donor engagement, and they delivered them with the smooth conviction of men who had never been told their life's work was inconvenient. I took notes. asked clarifying questions about timeline and logistics, made sure my voice remained level, my expression neutral, my back straight in a chair that suddenly felt like an instrument of torture. Through it all, Marguerite was silent, watching me with the patient attention of someone who has already won and can afford to be gracious about it. When the meeting ended, I gathered my things and walked toward the door without looking at Nolan. I was almost there when his voice stopped me. "Vivian, a moment." The board members filed past, avoiding eye contact with the careful precision of people who know they've witnessed something uncomfortable. Marguerite lingered. Of course she did, until Nolan said, "I'll meet you downstairs." And she finally left, her heels clicking against marble with the measured rhythm of a conquest. The door closed behind her. We were alone. "You could have told me yourself," I said, still facing the door. "Instead of a letter, instead of—" I stopped, because my voice was threatening to betray me. Breathed. Tried again. 5 years, Nolan. 5 years, and you couldn't even give me the courtesy of a phone call? The board. Do not. I turned then, and whatever he saw in my face made him take a step back. Do not hide behind the board. We both know they do whatever you tell them. This was your decision. Own it. He was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, rougher, the voice he used in late-night phone calls, the voice that had made me believe. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Then how was it supposed to happen? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I could see it in the way he wouldn't meet my eyes, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides like he was fighting against something he couldn't name. "Your mother," I said, not a question. "Vivian." She never would have accepted me. I always knew that. But I thought— My voice broke, just slightly, and I hated myself for it. "I thought you might fight for me anyway. Just once. I thought that might eventually matter more than her approval." "You don't understand." He moved toward me, stopping just close enough that I could smell his cologne. That familiar scent of sandalwood and old money that I'd spent 5 years learning to associate with longing. "Mother is ill. Dying, actually, though we haven't announced it yet. Her heart is failing, and the doctors say—" He paused, swallowing hard. "She has 6 months. Maybe less." I waited. "Her last wish," he continued, "is to see me settled, to know that the family name, the foundation, everything we've built, will continue. And Marguerite is appropriate," I finished, "is what Mother needs to see." His eyes finally met mine, and they were filled with something that looked like pain. But pain, I had learned, was easy to perform and hard to trust. "This isn't what I want. You have to believe that. But I can't. Not with Mother the way she is. I can't. You can't choose me." The words hung between us like smoke. "After the funeral," he said, and his voice was urgent now, desperate almost. "After Mother passes, after things settle, Vivian, nothing has to change between us. This is temporary, a few months of appearances, of doing what the family expects, and then—" "And then what?" I stepped back, putting distance between us. "We go back to phone calls at midnight and promises that never become real. I wait another 5 years for a time that's convenient for you." "It won't be like that." "It's already like that, Nolan." I picked up my bag, heavy with papers I would never need again. "It's been like that since the day you asked me to wait." I walked out of the boardroom, down the sweeping staircase, through the marble foyer, and out into the pale autumn sunlight. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel his eyes on me the entire way, and I could feel something else too. The weight of 5 years finally lifting, not because the situation had improved, but because the truth had finally been spoken aloud. He had chosen. It just hadn't been me. I returned to Avalon Cove and tried to remember who I had been before Nolan Pemberton asked me to wait. It was harder than I expected. 5 years is not a long time in the abstract, but when you've spent those years building something, building yourself around something, unpicking it becomes an archaeological excavation. What had I cared about before the foundation? What had brought me joy before late-night phone calls and the perpetual promise of eventually? Claire called that Sunday, as she always did. She was living in Edinburgh now, married to a gentle Scottish man who restored antique furniture and looked at her like she hung the moon. She had carved out a life of quiet happiness across an ocean, and most days I was grateful for that. Today, though, the distance felt sharper than usual. "Mum," her voice carried the particular concern of children who have learned that their parents are fallible. "You sound tired." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. I can hear it." A pause. "Did something happen with the foundation?" I had never told Claire about Nolan, not explicitly, anyway, but daughters know things. They observe patterns, notice absences, draw conclusions from the spaces between words. She had met him once, at a fundraiser 2 years ago, and afterward, she had said, "He looks at you like you're the only real person in the room. Mom, is there something you want to tell me?" There had been. There was still. But some truths are too complicated to speak aloud, and some failures are too intimate to share. "The foundation is going through some changes," I said carefully. "I'm stepping back from my role there." Stepping back or being pushed? "Claire, because you built that organization, Mum. I watched you do it. And if anyone thinks they can just... It's complicated." The words felt inadequate, but they were all I had. There are family dynamics involved, board decisions, things that have nothing to do with my work. The line went quiet. When Claire spoke again, her voice was softer. "Is this about him? About Nolan?" I closed my eyes. I don't know how to answer that. "You don't have to." She took a breath. "But Mum, you deserve someone who chooses you, not eventually, not after their mother dies, or the timing is right, or whatever excuse they've been giving. Someone who chooses you now, without conditions." "I know." "Do you?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Because I remember what it was like, growing up, watching you wait for Dad to show up, waiting for him to be the person he promised he could be. And I don't..." She stopped, collected herself. "I don't want you to spend the second half of your life the same way you spent the first." The words landed somewhere deep, in a place I had worked very hard to keep, protected. "I'm not waiting anymore," I said. "I promise you that." "Good." She paused. "Because you're not too old to start over, Mum. You're not too old to be loved the right way. And anyone who makes you feel like you are, they're not worth your time." After we hung up, I sat for a long time watching the waves break against the cliffs below my cottage. Claire was right. She usually was, with the particular clarity that comes from loving someone enough to tell them difficult truths. I was 53 years old. Not young, but not old either. Not by the standards of a life that had already proven itself capable of reinvention. I had started over once before, after my marriage ended. I could do it again. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was walking away from. The call came 3 days later from a number I didn't recognize. Miss Thorne. The voice was female, professional, vaguely familiar. This is Celeste Pemberton. We haven't formally met, but I believe you know who I am. Celeste. Nolan's younger sister, the middle child, the one who had survived when the youngest didn't. I had heard her name 100 times but seen her only once or twice. At foundation events where she floated through crowds like a ghost who hadn't decided whether she wanted to be seen. Ms. Pemberton, I kept my voice neutral. What can I do for you? I think it's more what I can do for you. A pause. I know what my brother has done, what he's doing, and I think you deserve to know the whole picture before you decide how to respond. I wasn't aware there was a picture to complete. There always is, Ms. Thorne. With my family, there are whole galleries. Her laugh was soft and bitter. Can you meet me? Tomorrow, perhaps. There's a tea room in Farrington, the Wren and Ivy, private enough for a conversation that shouldn't be overheard. I should have said no. I should have recognized that nothing good comes from secret meetings with sisters of men who have broken your heart. But I was tired of not knowing things, tired of operating on partial information while the Pembertons moved around me like chess pieces I couldn't see. What time? I asked. The Wren and Ivy was the kind of establishment that seemed designed to exclude anyone who hadn't been raised to expect white linen and silver tea services. It occupied a converted Victorian townhouse in the heart of Farrington's historic district, with bay windows that overlooked a cobblestone square and a clientele that spoke in the hushed tones of old money protecting its secrets. Celeste was already there when I arrived, seated at a corner table with her back to the wall, a position that allowed her to watch the door without being easily observed. She was thinner than I remembered, with Nolan's storm-grey eyes and the kind of fragile beauty that suggested a lifetime of carefully managed suffering. Ms. Thorne. She stood as I approached, extending a hand that felt like bird bones wrapped in silk. Thank you for coming. I'm not sure yet whether I should be thanking you. I took the seat across from her, noting the way her eyes tracked the room, checking exits, cataloguing faces, alert to potential witnesses in a way that spoke of long practice. You said you had information. I have perspective. She poured tea into delicate cups, her movements precise and automatic. Information implies facts, and facts in my family are slippery things, but perspective, what I've seen, what I understand, that I can offer. Then offer it. She smiled at my directness. A small, pained thing. You're not like the others, are you? The women my brother usually... She stopped, shaking her head. I'm sorry. That was indelicate. What others? Oh, there have been several. Over the years. Women of substance. Women who thought they were different. Who believed his promises. She met my eyes. They all learned the same lesson eventually. Nolan doesn't lie, exactly. He just delays, indefinitely, until the delay becomes the answer. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Why are you telling me this? Because you built something real. Her voice softened. The foundation, the programs you created, the children you've helped. That matters. It matters more than donor galas and society profiles and all the other nonsense. My family has convinced itself is important. She leaned forward. And because my mother is not actually dying. The words hung in the air between us. What? Her heart condition is real, but it's manageable. She has years left, not months. But Celeste's jaw tightened. Mother has decided it's time for Nolan to settle down, to produce heirs. to secure the family name, and she's using her health as leverage. The funeral, I said slowly. He told me after the funeral, there won't be a funeral, not for a long time. Celeste's eyes held mine with uncomfortable intensity. What there will be is an engagement announcement, a society wedding, a very public demonstration that Nolan Pemberton has finally chosen the appropriate woman. Marguerite. Marguerite. The name in her mouth sounded like an accusation. Daughter of Senator Vance, granddaughter of the Whitmore banking dynasty, possessor of exactly the right pedigree to satisfy mother's requirements. She's been cultivated for this, you understand. She's been positioned. I thought about Marguerite's smooth assumption of my office, her perfect smile, the way she had sat in my chair at the board meeting as if it had always belonged to her. How long? I asked. The positioning? About 18 months. The serious conversations about marriage? They started 6 months ago. Celeste's voice was carefully neutral. Around the time you began asking questions about your future with the foundation. 6 months. He had been negotiating his engagement while telling me to wait, to trust, to believe that eventually our time would come. Why would you tell me this? I asked again, and this time my voice was sharper. You're his sister, his family. Why would you betray? Because he's already betrayed you. She said it simply, without drama. And because I know what it's like to watch my family destroy people in the name of legacy. Our father did it to my mother, kept her isolated, dependent, convinced that her sacrifices were noble rather than exploited. Nolan learned from the best. That's not... I stopped, because I wasn't sure what I had been about to say. That it wasn't the same, that Nolan was different, that my situation was somehow unique. I'm not telling you what to do, Ms. Thorne. Celeste rose, leaving her tea untouched. I'm just telling you what's true. What you do with it is your decision. She was gone before I could respond, leaving me alone with 2 cups of cooling tea and the wreckage of 5 years' worth of believing. That evening, Nolan called. I almost didn't answer, but something had shifted in me, some final piece of self-deception falling away, and I found I wanted to hear what he would say. Not because I believed he would tell the truth, but because I wanted to know exactly how far he was willing to take the lie. Vivian. His voice was warm, concerned, performing intimacy with the unconscious skill of long practice. I was worried when you didn't respond to my messages. I've been busy. Of course. A pause. I wanted to talk about what happened at the board meeting. The way things were handled. It wasn't right. You deserved better than that. Did I? Vivian, your mother's not dying, Nolan. The silence on the line was absolute. I had tea with Celeste today, I continued, my voice remarkably steady. She told me some interesting things about timelines, about positioning, about an engagement announcement that's apparently been in the works for months. My sister has always been... Don't. The word came out harder than I intended. Don't tell me she's unstable or jealous or confused. She's the only person in your family who's been honest with me, and we both know it. He was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, stripped of its usual polish, raw in a way I had never heard. What do you want me to say? I want you to tell me the truth, just once, after everything. I think I've earned that. Another pause. I could hear him breathing, could picture him alone in his study, surrounded by leather-bound books and family portraits, and all the inherited weight of a name that mattered more to him than any living person. I love you, he said finally. That part was true. That part is still true. But not enough. No, the word was barely a whisper. Not enough. I closed my eyes. There it was. The truth I had spent 5 years avoiding, laid bare in 2 syllables. The engagement, I said. When is it being announced? Saturday, at the Pemberton Foundation Autumn Gala. His voice cracked slightly. The one you organised. The one that was supposed to be my last official event as director. Yes, of course. Of course they would announce it there, in the space I had built, surrounded by the work I had done, turning my farewell into a celebration of my replacement. It was efficient, if nothing else. The Pembertons had always been efficient. I see, I said. Vivian, please. Thank you for finally telling me the truth. I was proud of how calm my voice sounded, how little it betrayed. I appreciate the clarity. I never wanted to hurt you. No, I almost laughed. You just wanted to keep me waiting until hurting me became convenient. Goodbye, Nolan. I ended the call and sat very still in the darkness of my cottage, listening to the waves crash against the cliffs below. I thought about the woman I had been 5 years ago, hopeful, hungry for purpose, susceptible to the attention of a man who made her feel seen. I thought about the woman I was now, older, wiser, exhausted in ways that sleep couldn't fix. And I thought about the gala on Saturday, my gala, the culmination of months of planning, the event that was supposed to showcase the foundation's achievements and cement its future. I wasn't going to let them take that from me too. The Pemberton Foundation Autumn Gala was held at Thornwood Hall, a Gilded Age mansion that the family had converted into an event space for occasions that required maximum grandeur and minimum intimacy. I had overseen its decoration, thousands of white roses cascading from crystal chandeliers like frozen waterfalls. I had approved the menu, the entertainment, the seating chart that would place donors next to board members in configurations designed to maximize future giving. I had not planned to attend. My resignation was effective at month's end, which meant I was technically still employed when the gala took place, but no one expected me to show up. The conversations had made that clear. We understand if you prefer to skip this one, Vivian, given the circumstances. No one would blame you. Which was exactly why I decided to go. I spent the week before the gala, not in mourning, but in preparation. I had my hair done, not differently, but better. The silver highlights that had started appearing in my dark waves transformed into something intentional rather than inevitable. I bought a dress in deep burgundy, cut simply but beautifully, made of fabric that whispered rather than shouted. I retrieved from storage the pearl earrings my mother had left me, the only valuable things she'd ever owned, and I practiced my smile in the mirror until it looked genuine. If I was going to watch Nolan Pemberton announce his engagement in the space I had built, I was going to do it, looking like a woman who had already moved on. The evening was crisp and clear, the kind of autumn night that makes even the most cynical heart believe in transformation. I arrived alone, stepping out of a hired car onto the flagstone drive where valets in white gloves were parking vehicles worth more than most houses. Inside, the ballroom was magnificent. I had made sure of that. Crystal caught candlelight and scattered it across silk and diamonds and the polished surfaces of careful wealth. A string quartet played something by Debussy. Waiters circulated with champagne and canapes that cost more per bite than most people spent on dinner. And everywhere, were people who knew me, donors I had cultivated, board members I had advised, staff members I had hired and trained and mentored. They looked at me with expressions ranging from sympathy to curiosity to the particular discomfort of witnesses who hadn't expected the accident victim to show up at the scene. "Miss Thorne?" A familiar voice, low and surprised. "I didn't expect to see you here." I turned. Roland Ashby, the Foundation's longest-serving board member, a retired hospital administrator who had been one of my earliest allies, was looking at me with something like concern. "It's my event, Roland." I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. I wasn't about to miss it. "You know what they're announcing tonight?" "I do." He studied me for a moment, then nodded, slowly. "You're stronger than I gave you credit for. I should have fought harder when the board voted. I should have. It wouldn't have changed anything." I touched his arm briefly. "But thank you for saying it." I moved through the room like a ghost with a pulse, greeting people, making small talk, performing normalcy with the desperate precision of a woman who has nothing left to lose except her dignity. I could feel eyes on me, could feel the whispers that followed in my wake, but I kept my spine straight and my smile steady and refused to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. And then I saw them. Nolan was standing near the raised platform at the far end of the ballroom, where the evening speeches would take place. Marguerite was beside him in a gown of pale gold that made her look like something out of a Renaissance painting. Her hand was on his arm, proprietary and casual at the same time, and she was laughing at something one of the donors had said. They looked perfect together. That was the worst part. They looked like they belonged on the cover of a magazine dedicated to beautiful people, living beautiful lives, untouched by the messiness of emotions that couldn't be curated. Nolan's eyes found mine across the room. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in his expression. Guilt, perhaps, or regret, or maybe just surprise that I had dared to show up and remind everyone of the woman he had discarded. Then Marguerite followed his gaze, and her smile sharpened into something triumphant. I lifted my glass in a small toast, to what I couldn't have said, and turned away. The speeches began at 9. Board members took turns praising the Foundation's achievements. My achievements, though my name was carefully omitted from the list of credits. Donors were thanked. Partnerships were celebrated. The future was painted in glowing terms that somehow failed to mention the person who had built the present. I stood near the back of the room, watching, waiting for what I knew was coming. "And now," the board chairman said, his voice rich with the self-satisfaction of a man who has never had to fight for anything, "we have a very special announcement, a celebration of not just our Foundation's future, but of the future of the Pemberton family itself." Nolan stepped up to the microphone. Marguerite glided to his side like she had been born for this moment, which, in a sense, she had. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Nolan said, his voice carrying the effortless authority of inherited power. "This foundation has always been about family, about honoring the legacy of those we've lost and building something that will outlast us all." He turned to look at Marguerite, and his expression softened into something that was designed to look like love. "Tonight, I'm honored to announce that Marguerite Vance has agreed to become my wife." The applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Of course it was. These were people who understood that alliances mattered more than emotions, that marriages were mergers and love was a convenient fiction that made the arrangements more palatable. I set down my champagne glass, careful not to let my hand shake. Our engagement, Nolan continued, represents a new chapter, not just for our families, but for the foundation itself. Marguerite's passion for children's health. I laughed. It wasn't loud, just a soft exhalation, more breath than sound. But in the hushed reverence of the moment, it carried. Heads turned. Nolan's voice faltered, and Marguerite's eyes found mine with the cold precision of a predator identifying prey. Her passion for children's health, Nolan repeated, recovering, will help guide the foundation into its next phase of growth and impact. I should have stayed silent. I should have let the moment pass, collected my dignity, and left quietly through the back entrance I had identified hours ago for exactly this purpose. But something in me, something that had been silent for 5 years, patient and waiting and slowly dying, refused to be invisible anymore. "Excuse me," I said, and my voice was steady as I walked toward the platform. "I have something I'd like to say." The crowd parted. Of course I did. I was the evening's entertainment now, the unexpected drama that would give them something to discuss at brunches and board meetings for months to come. Nolan's face had gone pale. Marguerite's smile had frozen. And I had never felt more calm in my life. "For those who don't know me," I said, reaching the microphone stand that someone had thoughtfully left at the edge of the platform, "my name is Vivian Thorne. Until recently, I served as the director of this foundation. I built most of the programs you've heard celebrated tonight. I secured the partnerships. I did the work." I paused, letting the words settle. And I did it believing that my efforts mattered, that my place here was secure, that promises made would eventually be kept. "Vivian," Nolan took a step toward me. "I'm not here to cause a scene." I held up a hand and he stopped. "I'm here to say goodbye, properly, to the work I did and the people I cared about and the future I believed in." I turned to face the crowd. This foundation has done good work. It will continue to do good work, with or without me, and I wish nothing but success for its new leadership. My eyes found Marguerite. Her smile was still frozen, but something behind it had shifted. Uncertainty, perhaps, or the beginning of fear. "But I also want to say this." I took a breath. "To any woman in this room who has ever been asked to wait, who has ever been told that her time would come, that patience would be rewarded, that eventually her worth would be recognized. Be careful. Time is not a currency to be borrowed and repaid, and promises without timelines are not promises at all. They're postponements. They're convenient silence dressed up as hope." The room was utterly still. "Thank you for everything," I said, "and goodbye." I walked off the platform, through the parting crowd, toward the door. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had finally said what I should have said 5 years ago. The cold air hit me like mercy. I stood on the flagstone drive outside Thornwood Hall, breathing deeply, letting the October chill replace the suffocating warmth of that ballroom. My hands were shaking now, the adrenaline that had carried me through finally starting to ebb. But my mind was clear, clearer than it had been in years. "Miss Thorne." I turned. Celeste Pemberton was standing in the mansion's side entrance, wrapped in a pale shawl that made her look even more fragile than she had at the tea room. "That was remarkable," she said. "I've never seen anyone speak to my brother that way." "I've never spoken to anyone that way." I managed a small laugh. I'm not entirely sure what came over me. The truth? She moved closer, her heels silent on the stone. It's been building in you for a long time. I could see it, that day we met. You were ready to know, ready to stop pretending. And now, I asked, what happens now? Now you're free. Her smile was sad but genuine. That's the gift, you know. Humiliation feels like death in the moment, but it's actually a kind of birth. You're no longer bound by what they think of you. You can become whoever you want. I'm 53 years old, I said, starting over at 53. My grandmother started a business at 67, ran it until she was 84. Celeste shrugged. Age is a constraint only if you believe in it. We stood in silence for a moment, two women from opposite ends of a spectrum that had somehow intersected. Your brother, I said finally. Does he love her, Marguerite? He loves what she represents. He loves that she satisfies mother's requirements and makes the family look cohesive and powerful. Celeste's voice hardened slightly. Whether that's love or just efficient negotiation, I couldn't say. But not love the way he loved you? She met my eyes. No, that kind of love scares him. It requires things he's not capable of giving. Vulnerability, commitment, the willingness to choose something that isn't convenient. She paused. He loved you as much as he could, but his capacity isn't large enough. It never has been. It should have hurt more than it did. Maybe I had already done the grieving without realizing it. All those nights alone, all those phone calls that almost said something real, all those years of waiting for a door that was never going to open. Thank you, I said, for telling me, for being honest when you didn't have to be. We women need to look out for each other. Celeste reached out and squeezed my hand briefly. The men in my family have taken enough from enough people. I'm tired of being complicit in it. She disappeared back into the mansion, and I walked to where the hired car was waiting. As we drove away, I didn't look at Thornwood Hall growing smaller in the rear window. I looked forward, toward the dark ribbon of road leading back to Avalon Cove, toward whatever came next. The first week after the gala was the hardest. News of my impromptu speech spread through Lyndhurst society like wildfire, generating the kind of gossip that feeds on embarrassment and thrives in drawing rooms. I was variously described as brave, unstable, justified, and inappropriate, sometimes all four in the same conversation. My phone rang constantly, with calls I didn't answer, journalists seeking comment, former colleagues seeking details, acquaintances seeking proximity to drama. I ignored them all. Instead, I spent my days walking the cliffs above Avalon Cove, letting the salt wind scour my thoughts clean. I cooked meals I actually tasted, read books I actually finished, slept without the familiar weight of waiting pressing against my chest. It was remarkable how much energy I had reclaimed simply by giving up hope. On the 8th day, Nolan came. I was in my garden, a small patch of herbs and winter vegetables that I had been neglecting during my foundation years, when the black car pulled up my gravel drive. I knew it was him before the door opened. No one else drove a car that quiet or that expensive. Vivian. He looked tired. The perfectly pressed suit, the impeccable grooming, they were all there, but something underneath had frayed. Can we talk? I pulled off my gardening gloves slowly, deliberately. Is there something left to say? There's everything left to say. He moved toward me, then stopped, respecting a boundary I hadn't consciously drawn. I can't stop thinking about what you said at the gala. Which part? All of it. His voice cracked slightly. You were right. About the promises. About the postponements. About... He looked away. About me choosing convenience over you. I wasn't trying to be right. I set down my gloves on the garden bench. I was trying to be free. And are you? Free? I considered the question. I considered the cottage behind me. Small, drafty, mine. I considered the garden at my feet. Neglected but alive. I considered the years stretching ahead. Uncertain. Terrifying. Full of possibility. Getting there, I said. He took a step closer. What if I told you I was wrong? You were wrong. What if I told you I was willing to change, to make different choices? What if... He reached for my hand and I stepped back. Nolan. My voice was gentle but firm. You're engaged to another woman, in public, in front of everyone who matters to your family and your business and your legacy. I could end it. Could you? I held his gaze. Could you really walk into your mother's room, your dying mother, as you told me, and tell her you're breaking off the engagement she orchestrated? Could you face the board, the donors, the society pages? Could you build a life with me that would never meet your family standards, that would cost you everything you've spent 60 years accumulating? He was silent. That's what I thought. I turned back to my garden. Please leave, Nolan. Vivian, I spent 5 years being the woman who waited, the woman who understood, the woman who accommodated your complications and accepted your constraints and believed that eventually, things would be different. I knelt in the dirt, reaching for a weed that had grown up around my rosemary. I'm not that woman anymore, and even if you could give me everything you're promising, which we both know you can't, I'm not sure I would want it now. You don't mean that. I looked up at him. This handsome, powerful, deeply limited man who had taken 5 years of my life and given me nothing but beautiful words in return. Go home to your fiancé, Nolan. Plan your wedding. Produce your heirs. Secure your legacy. I pulled the weed out by its roots. I have my own life to tend now. He stood there for a long moment, and I could feel the struggle in him, the part that wanted to fight against the part that knew he wouldn't win. Finally, something in his shoulders collapsed. I did love you, he said quietly. In my way. I know that's not enough. It wasn't, I agreed, but I understand it was all you had. He walked back to his car without another word. I watched him go, waiting until the sound of the engine faded into silence. And then I returned to my garden. My hands were steady. My heart was quiet. And for the first time in 5 years, I felt like myself again. A month passed. I filed for formal retirement from the non-profit sector, using the modest savings I had accumulated to give myself time. Time to think, to rest, to consider what the next chapter of my life might look like. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during the foundation years. I visited Claire in Edinburgh, spending 2 weeks wandering cobblestone streets and drinking tea and rediscovering the pleasure of being somewhere, simply because I wanted to be there. I did not follow news of the Pemberton Foundation. I did not attend events where I might encounter members of that world. I built walls around my new peace and refused to let the old pain breach them. So when the call came from Roland Ashby, I almost didn't answer. Vivian. His voice was urgent in a way I had never heard. Have you seen the news? I've been avoiding the news, Roland, deliberately. You need to see this. A pause. Something has happened. with the foundation, with Nolan. I should have hung up. I should have maintained my distance, protected my hard-won equilibrium. But curiosity, or something more complicated than curiosity, made me reach for my laptop. The headline was everywhere. Pemberton Foundation. Audit reveals mismanagement. Board members implicated in financial irregularities. I read the article 3 times before the meaning fully registered. An anonymous whistleblower had provided documents to a financial journalist. Documents showing that for years, board members had been directing foundation funds toward investments that personally benefited them. Contracts had been awarded to companies they owned. Donor contributions had been funneled through shell organizations. The Children's Health Mission had been slowly hollowed out from the inside, while the exterior remained gleaming and respectable. And Nolan, according to the article, had either known and failed to act, or had been willfully blind to what was happening under his watch. I thought about the programs I had built, the staff I had hired, the children we had helped, and the children we might have helped if the resources had actually gone where they were supposed to. I thought about 5 years of working 70-hour weeks, while men in expensive suits played financial games I never knew about. And I thought about the meticulous files I had kept, documentation of every decision, every expenditure, every irregular request I had quietly flagged and noted and archived, because something in me had always known that foundations built on secrets eventually collapse. My phone rang again, this time a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Thorne? The voice was female, professional, unfamiliar. My name is Catherine Vance. I'm a forensic accountant working with the State Attorney's Office. We're investigating the Pemberton Foundation, and we've been told you might have information that could help. Would you be willing to speak with us? Catherine Vance. It took me a moment to place the name, and when I did, I almost laughed. Senator Vance's other daughter, Marguerite's sister. Miss Thorne, she prompted. Yes, I said. I'll speak with you. I have quite a lot to share. The investigation took 3 months. I provided everything I had. Years of documentation, flagged irregularities, emails I had saved because they didn't seem quite right. The forensic team was thorough and efficient, and Catherine Vance turned out to be nothing like her sister. Sharp, principled, quietly furious that her family name had become entangled in something corrupt. I never trusted him, she told me once, during a break between depositions. Nolan, he has that look, like he's calculating the cost of everything he says. She shook her head. Marguerite thought she was securing her future. She was just buying into his family's rot. By February, the Attorney General had filed charges against 4 board members. The foundation was placed under independent oversight, and Nolan, though not criminally charged, was forced to step down as chairman. His reputation in tatters, his carefully constructed legacy, reduced to newspaper headlines and cautionary tales. The engagement, predictably, did not survive. Marguerite Vance issued a statement expressing her shock and disappointment before retreating to her family's estate in the countryside. Senator Vance distanced himself publicly from the Pembertons. And Catherine became something unexpected, an ally. You know, she said, over dinner in a small restaurant in Farrington, the foundation doesn't have to die. The mission was always good. It was just the implementation that got corrupted. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that when the dust settles, someone will need to rebuild it. someone who understands what it was supposed to be. She met my eyes. Someone the donors trust. Someone who documented the problems because she actually cared about the work. I set down my wine glass. I'm retired, Catherine. Are you? Her smile was knowing. Or are you just waiting for something worth coming back for? I didn't answer, but I thought about it. All the way home to Avalon Cove, all through the sleepless night that followed. I thought about the children we had helped and the children we hadn't. I thought about the programs I had built and the programs that had been defunded to pay for someone's yacht. I thought about what it would mean to walk back into that world, not as someone waiting to be chosen, but as someone choosing for herself. By morning, I had made my decision. The hearing was held in late March, in a courtroom in the capital that smelled of old wood and new tension. I had been called as a witness, not for the prosecution, though my documents had helped build their case, but for the foundation itself, which was fighting to demonstrate its viability to the oversight board. The gallery was full. Donors, journalists, former board members, and in the back row, almost invisible among the observers, Nolan Pemberton. I did not look at him as I walked to the witness stand. I did not need to. I could feel his presence the way you feel weather changing, a pressure in the air, a shift in the light. The questions were straightforward. What had I observed? What had I documented? What did I believe was salvageable about the Foundation's mission? I answered honestly, carefully, without exaggeration or drama. I described what I had built and what had been corrupted. I outlined what could be saved and what needed to change. I spoke not as a victim seeking vindication, but as a professional offering expertise, because that was what I was, what I had always been, beneath the waiting and the hoping and the silence. When I finished, the oversight board chair, a severe woman with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing, leaned forward. Ms. Thorne, one final question. If this foundation is permitted to continue operating, would you be willing to return, to lead its reconstruction? The gallery stirred. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, waiting for my answer. I thought about the cottage in Avalon Cove, the peace I had found, the life I had built without Nolan Pemberton's promises. I thought about Claire, who had called last week to say she was pregnant, that I was going to be a grandmother, that there was a new life coming that would need a world worth living in. I thought about all the children we could help if the foundation actually worked the way it was supposed to. I would consider it, I said, under certain conditions, which are complete board replacement, independent financial oversight, and final approval on all program decisions. I paused. I'm not interested in rebuilding something that can be corrupted again. If I come back to do it right. The chair nodded slowly. Those terms seem reasonable. We'll be in touch. As I stepped down from the witness stand, I finally allowed myself to look at Nolan. He was older than he had been 6 months ago. Not in years, but in something harder to measure. The confidence was gone, replaced by a kind of bewildered grief. He looked like a man who had lost something he hadn't realized he valued until it was gone. Our eyes met. I saw him start to rise, to move toward me. I shook my head. Just slightly. Just enough. He stopped, and I walked out of the courtroom into the spring sunlight without looking back. The call came 2 weeks later. I was in Edinburgh, staying with Claire and helping her prepare for the baby. The Oversight Board had approved the Foundation's continuation under new leadership, and they wanted me. I know it's a lot to ask, Catherine said over the phone. You've built a beautiful life in Avalon Cove. You don't need this. No, I agreed. I don't need it. But I looked out the window of Claire's flat, at the ancient city spread below, spires and stone and centuries of human persistence. But I want it, I said. Not the way I wanted it before. Not as proof that I mattered, or as a way to be close to someone who couldn't commit. I want it because the work matters, because I'm good at it, because there are children who need what this foundation could provide if it's run properly. Is that a yes? Amivano Rao smiled. That's a yes. The new foundation launched in September. We kept the Pemberton name, not out of loyalty to the family, but because the name carried weight with donors, and rebranding would have cost resources better spent on programs. But everything else changed. New board members, selected for expertise rather than social connections, transparent financial reporting, programs designed by healthcare professionals rather than society wives looking for a charitable hobby. I moved back to the mainland, to a modest apartment in the town where the foundation was headquartered. I worked 60-hour weeks again, but this time they were my hours, spent on my terms, building something I controlled rather than something I had been given access to. Claire's baby was born in November, a girl with her father's red hair and her grandmother's stubborn chin. They named her Margaret after my mother. I held her for the first time in a hospital in Edinburgh, her small weight warm against my chest, and I thought about all the years I had spent waiting for a life to begin, waiting for George to become the husband I needed, waiting for Nolan to become the man he had promised, waiting for something outside myself to make me feel complete. I had wasted so much time waiting, but not anymore. On a Tuesday evening in late December, a year after the letter that had ended everything, Nolan Pemberton walked into the foundation's new offices. I was alone. The staff had left for the day, and I was reviewing grant proposals in the quiet hours I had always worked best in. He looked better than he had at the hearing, healthier, like someone who had been through something terrible and was slowly learning to live with the aftermath. The front door was unlocked, he said. I hope you don't mind. I was expecting a delivery. I set down my pen, but didn't stand. What can I do for you, Nolan? He looked around the office, smaller than the old one, functional rather than impressive. You've built something again. I have. Does it make you happy? I considered the question, considered him. This man I had loved, this man who had hurt me, this man who was now just a man like any other. It makes me proud, I said. Happiness is something I build in other places, with other people. He nodded slowly. I came to apologize, properly, not because I want anything or expect anything. I know I don't have that right, but because I've spent the last year thinking about what I did to you, and I couldn't let another year pass without telling you, I'm sorry. Okay. Okay. He seemed surprised by my response. That's all. What else would you like me to say? I leaned back in my chair. You hurt me. You wasted years of my life with promises you never intended to keep. And then, when it counted, you chose the safe path, the expected path, over anything real. I paused. But I survived. I rebuilt. And holding on to anger takes energy I'd rather spend elsewhere. So you forgive me? I accept that you did what you were capable of doing. I met his eyes. That's not quite forgiveness, but it's close enough. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, He smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen from him since before everything fell apart. "You're remarkable," he said. "I always knew that. I just wasn't brave enough to build my life around it." "No," I agreed. "You weren't." He walked to the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I did love you. Not well, not enough, but truly." "I know." My voice was gentler than I expected. "Goodbye, Nolan." He left, and I sat in the quiet of my office, surrounded by the work I had chosen, the life I had built, the future I had claimed for myself. I was 54 years old. I had a daughter who called me every Sunday, a granddaughter I adored, work that mattered, friends who showed up. I had finally learned that love isn't about waiting for someone to choose you. It's about choosing yourself, every day, in ways both large and small. The phone on my desk rang. Catherine Vance, calling to discuss the spring gala planning. I answered, and we talked about donor lists and venue options and all the ordinary details of a life being purposefully lived. Outside my window, the stars were emerging one by one. I didn't need anyone to give me a future anymore. I was building my own. 6 months later, I met someone. His name was Thomas Wren, a widowed architect who had lost his wife to cancer 3 years before and had rebuilt his life around his work and his 2 grown sons. We met at a conference on sustainable healthcare design, bonding over terrible coffee and a shared skepticism about keynote speakers who talked too much and said too little. He was nothing like Nolan. Where Nolan was polished, Thomas was weathered. Where Nolan spoke in careful calculations, Thomas said exactly what he meant and meant exactly what he said. Where Nolan's wealth created distance, Thomas's comfortable success kept him grounded. He asked me to dinner. I said yes. Over pasta and wine, he told me about his wife, how they had met, how they had loved, how losing her had broken something in him that was only now beginning to heal. "I'm not looking for a replacement," he said. "I'll never have what I had with Ruth. But I've learned that there's room for more than one great love in a life, room for different kinds of happiness." "That's very wise," I said. "That's very therapy." He grinned. 3 years' worth. My sons staged an intervention. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in longer than I could remember. We took things slowly. We learned each other's rhythms, each other's scars, each other's need for both companionship and solitude. There were no promises of forever, no timelines, no conditions. Just 2 people who had already survived enough to know that love, when it comes, should be chosen. Not waited for, not negotiated, not earned through patience and accommodation. Chosen. It is a Tuesday evening in spring. I am sitting on the terrace of Thomas's house, our house now since I moved in last month, watching the sun set over hills that roll toward a distant sea. Claire and her family are visiting next week. Margaret has started walking, and the photographs Claire sends show a determined little girl who already knows exactly what she wants. The foundation is thriving. The programs we built are reaching children we never could have helped before. Catherine Vance has become a friend, one of those unexpected gifts that life sometimes offers when you stop waiting for the expected ones. I am 55 years old, not young, but far from old. I have wrinkles I didn't have 5 years ago, grey in my hair that I've stopped trying to hide, a body that reminds me of its age in small daily ways. But I also have this, a life I chose, people who choose me back, work that matters, love that doesn't require waiting. Thomas brings me a glass of wine and settles into the chair beside me. His hand finds mine in the growing dusk. Easy, comfortable, certain. "What are you thinking about?" he asks. "The past," I admit. How long I spent waiting for things that were never going to come. How much time I wasted. Was it wasted? He considers this. You learned things, built things, became the person you are now. I suppose. And that person is pretty remarkable. He squeezes my hand. The waiting was the price of admission. Now you're here. I lean my head against his shoulder and watch the stars emerge, one by one, in a sky that feels vast with possibility. He's right, I think. The waiting was the price. The silence was the price. The years of accommodation and patience and hoping that things would eventually be different. But I paid that price. I paid it in full. And now I am here, in a life I built with my own hands, loved by someone who chooses me every single day. Not because I waited, because I finally stopped. If you enjoyed this journey, subscribe for more stories from Mr. Douglas Tales, where every fall becomes a rise.